"What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" my father said. And then he slapped me, in front of 30 guests holding champagne glasses, on the night of his 55th birthday, in a house I'd scrubbed on my hands and knees since sunrise. I ran out the front door with nothing but a backpack and a bruise on my cheek. I didn't know it then, but that slap was the last thing Gerald Talbot would ever do to me. Because by midnight, I'd be sitting in a black SUV across from a stranger who'd say 5 words that would unravel 18 years of lies. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. My name is Hillary, though for most of my life, I was forced to answer to Allison. I'm 21. Now, let me take you back to that Saturday morning, the day Gerald Talbot turned 55, and the last day I spent under his roof. I set my alarm for 5 a.m. that morning, same as every Saturday. Except this Saturday came with a 2-page handwritten list Donna had left on the kitchen counter the night before. Sweep the patio. Arrange the folding chairs, 32 of them, one for each guest on Gerald's list. Press the tablecloth. Slice the lemons. Wash the Pottery Barn serving platters by hand because the dishwasher leaves spots. Their house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in Henrico County, Virginia, a 4-bedroom colonial with a manicured lawn Gerald hired someone to mow, but told the neighbors I did. Inside, the dining table was solid oak, seats 12, polished weekly by me. On the counter, 2 cases of Napa Valley Cabernet and a 3-tier cake from a bakery that charged more for fondant than I earned in a week. My room was downstairs, not the finished basement, the storage closet next to the water heater. No window. A twin mattress Gerald had pulled from a curbside pile when I was 9. A wool blanket that smelled like damp cardboard no matter how many times I washed it. Megan's room was upstairs. Queen bed, flat screen, a vanity mirror ringed with those Hollywood bulbs. She was 23 and still lived at home. Still had her credit card linked to Gerald's account. Still hadn't learned how to boil an egg because that was what I was for. I'd spent 3 months saving for Gerald's gift. A leather wallet, real leather, from a department store downtown. $84, which doesn't sound like much unless you're earning $11 an hour scrubbing sheet pans at a restaurant called Rosie's off Route 1. I wrapped it in craft paper because I couldn't afford a gift bag. I didn't know, standing there in that kitchen at 5 in the morning with flour on my hands, that the wallet would be the last thing I ever gave that man. Gerald came downstairs at 10. Polo shirt. Ralph Lauren, the one with the big pony logo. Powder blue. Khakis creased like knife edges, cologne so thick it reached me before he did. He walked the patio like a general inspecting his troops, moved one balloon cluster 6 inches to the left, stared at the lemon slices I'd arranged on the water pitcher and said, without looking at me, "They're uneven. Do them again." Donna appeared at noon. Hair blown out, pearl studs, a linen dress from Ann Taylor she'd ordered online and made me steam. She inspected the kitchen, ran a finger along the countertop, and whispered something to Gerald I wasn't supposed to hear but did. "She only got you something cheap. Just brace yourself." Megan showed up last, because of course she did. New dress, new highlights, new heels clicking across the floor I'd waxed at 6 a.m. She handed Gerald an Apple Watch, the Series 9, stainless steel, the one that retails for $700. She'd charged it to the supplementary credit card Gerald gave her for emergencies. Gerald opened it, beamed, and kissed her forehead. "This is my girl," he told the first guests walking through the door. He had his arm around Megan. "She always knows what her old man likes." He didn't look at me. He never did when other people were watching. I was the girl who carried trays, refilled glasses, wiped condensation rings off the coffee table before they could set. When one of the guests, a woman from Gerald's office, asked Donna, "Shouldn't Allison sit down and eat with us?" Donna smiled the way she always smiled, warm as a closed door, and said, "Oh, she likes to help. It's her way of showing gratitude. You know how it is with adopted ones." I kept carrying trays. It happened during the gift opening. Gerald sat at the head of the table like it was a throne. 30 guests arranged around him. Neighbors, church friends, a few co-workers from the insurance agency he managed. Champagne flutes catching the patio string lights. Megan perched on the armrest of his chair, filming on her iPhone. Donna stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, radiating the image of a woman who had everything figured out. I came forward with the craft paper package. I'd written on the front in my neatest handwriting, "Happy birthday." Allison. Gerald took it, weighed it in his hand. I remember thinking he might actually smile. He smiled sometimes, when no one could accuse him of going soft. But then he tore the paper, pulled out the wallet, flipped it open, flipped it closed, and held it up like evidence at trial. "What kind of worthless junk did you give me?" His voice cut through the chatter. Conversation stopped. Forks paused midair. Someone set down a glass too carefully. I started to explain. "I saved up for 3 months." 3 months, and this is all you got?" He stood. The chair scraped the flagstone. "Even the dog gets better treats." And then he hit me. Open palm, right across the left side of my face. The sound was sharp and flat, the kind that doesn't echo because it doesn't need to. My head snapped sideways. A champagne flute fell off the table and shattered on the patio floor, and for a second that was the only sound in the world. No one moved. Donna looked down at her plate. A man from Gerald's office studied his napkin. Megan bit her lip and kept filming. One person stood. Ruth Kessler, the next-door neighbor, 70 years old and 5 feet tall. "Gerald, that was uncalled for. Stay out of my family business." Ruth sat back down, but she didn't look away from me, and I have never forgotten that. I stood there with the taste of copper on my tongue and a wallet on the ground between us, and I thought, that slap will be the best evidence the lawyers need. I didn't understand that thought yet. I wouldn't understand it for hours, but something inside me had already started counting. I didn't go back to the party. I went to the storage closet, pulled the Jansport backpack off the nail on the wall. Faded navy, fraying at the zipper, the only thing that had followed me from high school, and packed what I could. 2 shirts, 1 pair of jeans without holes, a toothbrush, a phone charger. The envelope I'd found in the bottom of a box Gerald threw out last spring, the one with a state logo I didn't understand yet, and from inside a shoebox under my mattress, $340 in cash, mostly 1s and 5s, tip money from Rosie's that I'd hidden because Gerald checked my bank account, $340, a backpack, a bruise already blooming purple on my cheekbone. That was everything I owned in this world. I walked through the living room on my way out. The party had resumed. Gerald was laughing at something someone said, champagne in hand, the wallet nowhere in sight. Megan was showing guests something on her phone, probably the video. Donna stood at the window and watched me cross the front yard. She reached for the curtain and pulled it shut. Nobody called my name. Outside, the October air hit my face and the sting on my cheek flared like a second slap. Henrico County at 9 p.m. is dark. Not city dark, where there's always a bodega lit up on the next corner, but suburb dark, where the streetlights are spaced far apart and the silence between houses feels deliberate. I walked along Patterson Avenue. No destination, just a way. Behind me, the music from the party got softer and softer until it was just bass notes and then nothing at all. I'd made it maybe 2 miles when headlights slowed behind me. A black Cadillac Escalade, clean tinted windows, Virginia plates. It rolled to a stop 10 feet ahead. The rear door opened. And I should have run. Every instinct said run. But I was already so tired of running from things, I thought. Maybe just this once, I'd see what was running toward me. A man stepped out first. Mid-50s, tall, lean, wearing a charcoal peacoat I'd later learn was Brooks Brothers. Not flashy, just the kind of coat that fits like someone measured you for it. His hair was dark brown threaded with silver. And his eyes, hazel green, wide set, catching the street light, were the exact same eyes I saw in my bathroom mirror every morning. Behind him, a woman. Shorter, red-haired, sharp-featured, carrying a leather portfolio like she'd just left a courtroom. She kept her distance, professional, watchful. The man's hands were trembling. I could see that even in the dark. "I'm sorry to frighten you," he said. His voice cracked on the second word. "My name is Richard Whitford, and I believe I am your biological father." I took a step back. My shoulders hit a mailbox post. "That's not possible. My biological parents didn't want me, that's what I was told." "You were told wrong." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a photograph. Small, creased at the corners, clearly handled 1,000 times. A woman holding a toddler. The woman had auburn hair and cheekbones like mine, and a smile that leaned slightly to the left. The toddler had hazel green eyes. "Her name was Catherine," he said. "She was your mother. She died in a car accident when you were 2, and I have spent every single day since then trying to find you." I looked at the photograph, then at him, then at the photograph again, because the woman in it had the same mouth I did, the same tilt of the head, and looking at her felt like finding a word you've been searching for your whole life. The red-haired woman spoke. "My name is Margaret Hale. I'm Mr. Whitford's attorney, specializing in family law. We're not here to take you anywhere you don't want to go. We've been monitoring your situation through legal channels for several months. Tonight, when our investigators saw you leave the house, we made the decision to approach." "You were watching the house?" Margaret nodded. "The birthday party. Many guests. It was the safest opportunity to confirm your identity visually." She paused. "We also saw you run." I touched my cheek without thinking. The bruise pulsed under my fingertips. Richard Whitford looked at the mark on my face, and something behind his eyes broke very quietly. We sat in the back of the Escalade. Richard on one side, me on the other, Margaret in the front passenger seat with her portfolio open. The engine was running, the heat on low. It was the warmest I'd been all night. Richard told me the story like a man who'd rehearsed it for 18 years and still wasn't ready. Catherine died on I-64 eastbound on a Tuesday morning in March. A delivery truck crossed the median. She was killed instantly. Richard was in the passenger seat. Shattered pelvis, collapsed lung, 4 months in the hospital. Hillary, me, was at home with a neighbor. "While I was in the ICU," he said, "Child Protective Services placed you in emergency foster care. Standard procedure when there's no available parent." I understood that. What I didn't understand was why, when I got out of the hospital and filed to bring you home, they told me I couldn't. A social worker named Leonard Grubb handled the case. Grubb told the family court that Richard had signed a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, a legal document surrendering custody permanently. Grubb presented the court with a signed form. The judge approved the adoption. "I never signed anything," Richard said. "I was on a ventilator. I couldn't hold a pen, let alone read a legal document, but the court had a piece of paper with my name on it, and that was enough." By the time Richard hired a lawyer and challenged the ruling, it was too late. The adoption had been finalized. The file was sealed. His daughter had a new name, a new family, a new life somewhere in Virginia that he wasn't allowed to know about. "So I hired investigators," he said. "Year after year. It doesn't matter what I spent. I would have spent everything." His voice didn't waver when he talked about the money. It wavered when he said the word, everything. "Leonard Grubb," I said. "How much did they pay him?" Richard looked at Margaret. Margaret closed her portfolio and said, "That's what we intend to prove in court." The SUV was still parked on Patterson Avenue, hazard lights blinking amber against the dark. I sat with my backpack on my lap, clutching the straps like a kid on the first day of school, and I told them about the envelope. Last spring, Gerald had decided Megan needed a yoga studio in the house. That meant clearing the storage closet, my room, and moving my things to an even smaller corner by the furnace. He threw most of my belongings into a garbage bag and tossed it by the curb. I went through the bag before the trash truck came, because that's what you learn to do when nothing you own is safe. You check, and you save what you can. At the bottom of a water-damaged cardboard box, underneath old report cards and a Ziploc bag of baby clothes, I found a manila envelope. Official-looking. The return address had a seal and the words, Virginia Department of Social Services. Inside was a single document, partially redacted, with the heading, Title IV, E-Adoption Assistance, Monthly Disbursement Summary. And across the top, typed in plain government font, Allison G. Talbot. I didn't know what Title IV-E was. I didn't know what a disbursement summary meant. But I knew my name was on a government document that Gerald had never shown me, so I folded it up and put it in my backpack. I'd been carrying it for 6 months without understanding why. I pulled it out now and handed it to Margaret. She unfolded it under the dome light, and I watched her expression change. Not dramatically, but the way a poker player's face changes when the final card flips. "This is the adoption subsidy record," she said. "The state of Virginia has been paying Gerald and Donna Talbot approximately $810 per month for your care and maintenance for 18 years. She looked at me. "That's roughly $175,000. How much of it did you ever see?" I thought of the mattress from the curb, the blanket that smelled like cardboard, the closet with no window. "None," I said. Richard turned his face toward the window, and in the reflection of the glass I could see him pressing his jaw shut so hard the muscle jumped. "All those years," I said, half to myself, "he called me a burden. But I wasn't a burden. I was a paycheck." Margaret drove us to a Hilton off Broad Street. Not the Talbot house, not a shelter. Just somewhere clean and quiet and safe. Richard checked us in under his name. Separate rooms, adjoining door, and the first thing I did was stand in the middle of mine and not know what to do. The bed had white sheets that smelled like detergent instead of mildew. There was a window. I opened the curtains and just looked out at the parking lot lights for a long time, because looking out a window from my own room was something I hadn't done in years. While I stood there, the memories came in layers, the way water rises, steady and cold. I started cooking the family meals when I was 10. Gerald said it was to teach me responsibility. By 12, I was doing all the laundry, all the dishes, all the grocery shopping on foot because Gerald wouldn't drive me. Megan got a Toyota Camry for her 16th birthday. I got a bus pass that expired after 1 month because nobody renewed it, so I walked an hour and a half to Rosie's for my shifts. Gerald never let me keep my own documents. No birth certificate, no social security card, no state ID. When I asked for a driver's license at 17, he said, "What for? You don't have anywhere to go." At the time, I thought he was right. Now I understood he'd designed it that way. I kept thinking, why did Gerald keep me all those years if he despised me? Why not just send me back into the system? If I was so worthless, why hold on? Now I had the answer. $810 a month. That's why. Have you ever met someone who hated you but refused to let you leave? Someone who made you feel like garbage but held on to you like you were gold? If you have, tell me in the comments. Because I think you already know what that math looks like. Donna's voice echoed in my head the way it always did, sweet and sharp as lemon juice on a cut. "Gratitude, Allison. That's all we've ever asked for. Is that really so hard?" "No, Donna. What was hard was realizing I'd been grateful to people who were stealing from me. Let me go back 2 weeks, before the party, before the slap, before any of this. Because the truth is, Gerald had already shown me who he was. I just didn't have the vocabulary for it yet." It was a Tuesday evening. Gerald called me into his home office, the room no one entered without permission. Mahogany desk, leather wingback chair, a shelf of hardcover books he'd never read, arranged by color. He was sitting behind the desk like a judge, a manila folder open in front of him. "Sit down," he said. "Not have a seat. Sit down." He pushed a document across the desk. 10, maybe 12 pages, dense print, a blue signature tab sticking out from the bottom. "This is a voluntary agreement," he said. "It states that you choose to remain under my guardianship because you are not financially or emotionally prepared to live independently. Sign it." I picked it up. Most of the language was impenetrable, whereas the dependent acknowledges that independent living presents undue financial and psychological risk. But one clause on page 4 I understood perfectly. The agreement authorized Gerald to continue managing all state and federal benefits associated with the dependent's care. He wanted me to sign over my own subsidy. Again. This time voluntarily, with my adult signature, so he could keep collecting even after I aged out of the system. Why do I need to sign this? I asked. Gerald's expression didn't change. Because without this family, you're on the street. You don't have a degree. You don't have savings. You don't even have an ID. So you're going to sign this, and you're going to sign it before my birthday. Consider it your gift to me. I didn't sign. I asked for more time. Gerald said nothing, just closed the folder and placed it back in the desk drawer. Slowly, the way you put a loaded gun in a safe. That's why he hit me at the party. It wasn't about the wallet. It was never about the wallet. It was because I'd told him no for the first time in 18 years and he couldn't stand it. Back at the Hilton, the morning after. I woke up at 5 a.m. out of habit. Heart pounding, already running through the chore list in my head before I remembered. There was no list. There was just a hotel room with white sheets and a window full of gray October sky. A knock on the adjoining door. Richard, already dressed, holding 2 cups of coffee from the lobby. He set one on the desk and sat in the chair across the room. Not close, not far, just present. Like he was afraid that if he moved too fast, I'd disappear again. Margaret arrived at 8 with a garment bag. Inside, a pair of new jeans and a cream-colored cashmere sweater, still tagged. Something clean to wear, she said, practical as always. I took them into the bathroom and put them on and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. It was the first time in my life I was wearing something that no one else had worn first. When I came out, Richard's eyes went red at the edges, but he didn't cry. He just nodded and said, Catherine had that same look, like she was deciding whether to trust the mirror. I sat on the edge of the bed and said what I'd been thinking all night. I need proof. Not the photo, not the story. I need a DNA test. If you're who you say you are, the science will back it up. And if you're not, I need to know that too. Richard didn't flinch. Of course. Margaret's already located an AABB-accredited lab in Richmond. We can go today. No hesitation, no offense, no guilt trip. Just of course. I'd spent 21 years in a house where asking a question was treated as a personal attack. And here was a man who answered like questions were the most natural thing in the world. I've spent my whole life doing what I was told, I said. If I'm going to trust you, it'll be because I chose to. Not because I had nowhere else to go. Richard set down his coffee. That's exactly how it should be. The lab was a low brick building off Carey Street, clean, clinical, fluorescent. A technician in scrubs swabbed the inside of my cheek, then Richard's, labeled the vials, and told us results would take 3 to 5 business days. 5 days. I'd waited 21 years to know who I was. 5 more felt like holding my breath underwater. While we waited, Richard brought things to the hotel. Not gifts, not the way Gerald gave gifts, as transactions with strings attached, but pieces. An album of photographs. Catherine pregnant, laughing on a porch swing, one hand on her belly. Catherine holding a newborn with a pink hat. Richard and Catherine and the baby in front of a brick bungalow in Richmond's fan district with a red door. The baby had hazel green eyes, even then. That's the house you came home to, Richard said. I still own it. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I studied each photograph like it was a document I needed to memorize for a test. My mother's face, her hands, the way she stood, slightly tilted, weight on her left foot, the same way I stand when I'm not thinking about it. She's beautiful, I said. You look exactly like her, he said, especially the eyes. On the 5th day, Margaret called. I was sitting on the hotel bed with the album open to a photo of Catherine blowing out birthday candles when my phone rang. 99.998% probability of paternity, Margaret said. It's confirmed. Richard Whitford is your biological father. I didn't say anything for a while. I just held the phone and looked at the photograph and felt something crack open in my chest. Not break, not shatter, but open, the way a door opens when someone finally turns the handle from the other side. 99.998%. A number. But for me, it was the first proof in 21 years that I wasn't an accident nobody wanted. Margaret's voice came back on the line, steady and precise. Now, we have enough. The next step is family court. Here's what I learned later. From the court filings, from Ruth Kessler's testimony, from the texts Donna would eventually hand over to Margaret. The morning after the party, Gerald called the Henrico County Police and reported me missing. Not because he was worried, because he was calculating. The officer who responded ran my information and told Gerald what he didn't want to hear. I was 21, a legal adult. If I'd left voluntarily, there was no missing persons case to open. She didn't leave voluntarily, Gerald told the officer. She's mentally unfit. She can barely function without supervision. The officer asked if Gerald had any documentation of that. A diagnosis, a guardianship order, anything legal. Gerald didn't, because I wasn't mentally unfit. I was just controlled. That night, according to Donna's texts, the ones she'd later surrender as evidence, Gerald paced the living room for 3 hours. Donna sat on the couch and typed what he dictated. Gerald. If that girl talks to anyone, CPS, a lawyer, anyone, we're done. Find the adoption file. All of it. The originals. Donna. You said she doesn't know anything. Gerald. She doesn't. But if someone shows her where to look. He knew. He'd always known. The forged signature, the bribed caseworker, the subsidy he'd been collecting for 18 years on a child he treated like hired help. Gerald carried all of it in his head the way some men carry debt. Constantly aware, constantly managing, never once considering that the whole structure might collapse. Gerald wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of what I'd find out once I was free. He didn't know that the man he should have been afraid of, the man who'd spent 18 years and a private investigator's retainer trying to find his daughter, was sitting in a Hilton 20 minutes away, assembling a file 3 inches thick. Margaret spread the documents across the hotel desk like a surgeon laying out instruments. This was the second time I saw the evidence. But this time, it had teeth. Look at this, she said, sliding a photocopied form toward me. It was the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights, dated October 2005. At the bottom, a signature, Richard A. Whitford. Neat, deliberate, slightly forward-leaning. Then she placed a second sheet beside it. A certified report from a forensic document examiner, Dr. Elaine Marsh, who had compared the signature on the relinquishment form to 12 known exemplars of Richard's handwriting. Tax returns, mortgage applications, business contracts spanning 20 years. The pen pressure is inconsistent, Margaret said, pointing. The letter formation in the surname doesn't match any of the exemplars. Dr. Marsh's conclusion, and I'm quoting, is that the signature was produced by a hand other than that of Richard A. Whitford with a high degree of certainty. She let that settle. Then she pulled a third document from the file, a bank record. A personal checking account belonging to Leonard Grubb, the social worker who had handled my case. On October 14th, 2005, 6 days before the adoption was finalized, a deposit of $5,000 appeared. The source, a wire transfer from Gerald R. Talbot's personal account. Not through the church, Margaret said. Not through a charity. Direct, account to account, 1 week before the adoption was approved. I stared at the numbers. $5,000. That's what my entire identity had cost. My name, my father, my childhood, traded for the price of a used car. Richard sat across the room, arms folded, jaw tight. He'd seen these documents before, but watching me see them, that was something different. I could tell by the way he breathed, shallow and careful, like a man trying not to break something by holding it too hard. So the adoption can be undone? I asked. Margaret closed the file. Under Virginia law, an adoption procured through fraud, including forged consent, can be declared void. Yes, it can be undone. 2 days before the court date, a letter arrived at the Hilton's front desk. Addressed to me, Allison Talbot. Not Hillary Whitford, because Gerald still refused to believe I had any other name. Inside, a single page on Gerald's insurance agency letterhead, handwritten, and a photograph. Me, at 3 years old, sitting on Gerald's lap in the living room of the house on the cul-de-sac, wearing a pink dress I don't remember owning. He was smiling. I was smiling. It looked like a family. The letter read, Allison, I don't know who this man is or what he's told you, but he is not your father. He is a stranger exploiting a confused young woman. We are your family. We have been your family for 18 years. Come home. We can work this out. I forgive you for leaving. Dad, I read it 3 times. The word forgive hit me differently each time. First like a door opening, then like a lock clicking shut, then like a hand gripping my wrist. He forgave me. For leaving. After he hit me. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and felt the room tilt. 18 years of conditioning doesn't shut off because a DNA test says 99.998%. Somewhere inside me, a voice I'd carried since childhood whispered, what if Gerald's right? What if this is all a trick? What if Richard just wants something from you too? I looked at Richard, who was reading in the chair by the window, and said, how do I know you're not the same as him? How do I know you won't just use me for something else? He put the book down. He didn't look hurt. He looked like a man who understood exactly why I was asking. You don't, he said. Not yet. And I'm not going to try to convince you with words, because words are cheap. The DNA doesn't lie. The documents don't lie. And the court will decide what's true. All I'm asking is that you let the evidence speak. He picked up his book again and went back to reading. And that, the not pushing, the giving me room, was the thing that scared me most, because it was so different from everything I knew. That night I couldn't sleep, so I did what I always did when the world stopped making sense. I looked at the evidence. I took the Title IV-E envelope from my backpack and set it on the desk beside Gerald's letter. 2 documents. One from the state of Virginia, confirming that Gerald received $810 a month to take care of me. One from Gerald claiming he was my family. If Gerald loved me, why did I sleep in a storage closet? If Gerald loved me, why didn't I have a birth certificate, a social security card, a single piece of identification with my name on it? If Gerald loved me, why was the guardianship extension he'd tried to make me sign designed to keep the subsidy flowing, not to keep me safe? The answer was in the math. It had always been in the math. Gerald didn't love me. Gerald invoiced me. I called Margaret at 11 p.m. She picked up on the second ring, which told me she'd been expecting this call. I'm going to court, I said. Not because I trust Richard, not fully, not yet, but because I deserve to know the truth. I've earned that. That's all we need, she said. The next afternoon, Derek Simmons came to the hotel. Mid-40s, square-jawed, serious. A social worker with the Virginia Department of Social Services, assigned to review Richard's petition. He asked me about my living conditions growing up. I told him about the closet, the chores, the missing documents, the isolation. He wrote everything down in a small notebook, and when I finished, he didn't say I'm sorry, or that must have been hard. He said, what you're describing, if it's corroborated by the records, constitutes neglect. And the financial component constitutes exploitation of adoption assistance funds. Then he looked at me and added more quietly, this isn't just about your adoption being fraudulent, Ms. Whitford. This is about a system that was supposed to protect you and didn't. I'm not choosing Richard over Gerald, I told myself as Derek left. I'm choosing the truth over the lie I've been living. I didn't witness this part directly. It came out later, piece by piece, through Donna's testimony and the texts she turned over. But I'll tell it the way it happened, because you need to understand who Gerald thought he was walking into that courtroom to face. The night before the hearing, Gerald sat at the dining room table, the same oak table I'd polished every week for 18 years, and rehearsed his testimony with his lawyer. Not Margaret's caliber of lawyer, a general practitioner from a strip mall office who charged by the half hour and had never handled an adoption fraud case in his life. I have all the paperwork, Gerald said. Signed, sealed, stamped by the court. I've been a member of First Baptist for 22 years. I coach Little League. Everyone in this community knows who I am. Donna, sitting across from him, ventured a question. What about the subsidy envelope? What if they ask about the money? Gerald didn't look up. Nobody audits that. We're fine. Megan wandered through on her way to the kitchen and asked, her voice bored, incurious, the voice of someone whose biggest problem was a slow Wi-Fi connection. If Allison doesn't come back, can I turn her room into a walk-in closet? Gerald didn't answer her either. He was already drafting his opening statement in his head, the one where he'd stand before a judge and explain what a generous, God-fearing man he was for taking in a child nobody else wanted. He didn't know that the judge would be looking at a 3-inch file of forged signatures, bribery records, and a forensic examiner's report. He didn't know that the girl he'd raised to be silent had finally found her voice. He didn't know that the man sitting across the aisle would be the father whose name someone had forged 18 years ago. Gerald walked into that courtroom like a man who had never lost. He was about to learn what losing looked like. The morning of the hearing, Margaret turned the hotel conference room into a war room. She'd reserved a table for 6 and covered it with 5 stacks of documents, each flagged with colored tabs. I sat at one end with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands, and she walked me through the case the way a general walks through a battle plan. Calm, precise, leaving nothing to chance. Stack 1, she said, tapping the first pile. DNA results. AABB accredited lab, chain of custody documented, 99.998% probability. Irrefutable. Stack 2. The forensic handwriting analysis from Dr. Elaine Marsh. The signature on the relinquishment form is not Richard's. Her report is 46 pages, but the conclusion is 1 sentence. Stack 3. Financial records obtained through our petition to the Virginia Department of Social Services. Gerald and Donna Talbot received $810 per month in Title IV adoption assistance for approximately 216 months. Total, $174,960. Derek Simmons's assessment confirms the funds were not used for your welfare. Stack 4. Derek's full report. Child neglect findings. No medical records after age 14. No personal identification documents in your possession. Living conditions inconsistent with the purpose of adoption assistance. Stack 5. She paused. A sworn declaration from Ruth Kessler, your former neighbor. She's agreed to testify that she witnessed ongoing patterns of unequal treatment and that she personally observed Gerald strike you at the birthday party. Ruth, 70 years old, 5 feet tall, the only person in that backyard who'd stood up. I hadn't spoken to her since that night, but she'd spoken to Margaret, and she hadn't hesitated. Do I have to say anything in court? I asked. Margaret looked at me. Only if you want to. The paperwork speaks for itself. Richard, sitting at the far end of the table, hadn't said a word through the entire briefing. Now he spoke, just once. Whatever happens in there, you already won. You're free. I looked at the 5 stacks on the table. A lifetime of lies, dismantled into tabbed folders, and I thought, no, I haven't won yet. But I'm about to. Richard took me to Banana Republic that afternoon. Not because the clothes mattered, but because, he said, you should walk into that room looking exactly like who you are, someone who deserves to be heard. I tried on a navy blazer, a white silk blouse, charcoal slacks, stood in front of the fitting room mirror and stared at the person looking back. She had straight shoulders and clear eyes and looked like someone who might sit at a conference table, not carry trays to one. Your mother used to do that, Richard said when I came out. He was leaning against the wall outside the fitting rooms, hands in his coat pockets. Stand in front of the mirror for a long time, then she'd smile at herself. Just a little, like she'd settled something. I hadn't smiled, but I understood what he meant. Something was settling. On the drive back, Richard pointed to a brick bungalow on a tree-lined street in the Fan District. Red front door, white shutters, a porch swing hanging still in the October air. That's the house, he said, the one in the photos. I looked at it through the window. The house I'd been born into, the house I'd been taken from, and I didn't feel the ache I expected. I felt something quieter, a kind of recognition that sits in the body instead of the mind. That night, the night before the hearing, I sat on the hotel bed and wrote in a notebook I'd bought at the CVS across the street. Not a speech, not a plan, just a line, for myself. No matter what happens tomorrow, I will never go back to that storage room. I will never answer to a name that isn't mine. I will never again be grateful for being used. I slept 4 hours. I dreamed of a red front door opening. Richmond Family Court, a Tuesday morning in late October. The building was old federal brick, columned entrance, hallway floors that echoed every footstep like the building wanted you to know who was coming. I arrived at 8:30 with Richard on my left and Margaret on my right, Derek Simmons a few steps behind carrying a banker's box of records. Navy blazer, white blouse, hair pulled back in a low knot. No jewelry, I didn't own any, but my hands were steady and my back was straight. Gerald arrived at 8:40. Gray suit, burgundy tie, Donna on his arm in her Ann Taylor dress, Megan trailing behind in something too casual for court. His lawyer carried a single file folder. Gerald carried his chin at the angle of a man who believed this was a formality. Then he saw us. His eyes went to me first, registered the blazer, the posture, the absence of the girl who used to stare at the floor. Then they moved to Richard. Then to Margaret. Then to the banker's box Derek was setting on the plaintiff's table. Gerald's face didn't crumble. It recalibrated. I'd seen that look before. The rapid mental arithmetic of a man who controls every variable suddenly realizing there's one he missed. Donna's hand tightened on his arm. Megan pulled out her phone, then thought better of it and put it away. Gerald and I made eye contact across the hallway. For the first time in my life, I didn't look down. The clerk opened the courtroom doors and called the case. In the matter of the adoption of the minor formerly known as Hillary Whitford, now styled Allison Grace Talbot. We walked in, both sides, the same door, different worlds. Margaret stood the way I imagined a scalpel would stand if it could, upright, precise, reflecting light. She addressed the judge, the Honorable Patricia Dwyer, without notes. Your Honor, we are here today to present evidence that the adoption of Hillary Whitford, known for the past 18 years as Allison Grace Talbot, was obtained through fraud. Specifically, the forging of a biological parent's consent to relinquish parental rights, facilitated by a financial payment to the case-assigned social worker. She presented the DNA results first, the lab technician's sworn affidavit, the chain of custody, the number, 99.998%. Judge Dwyer examined the report, adjusted her reading glasses, and set it aside with a small nod. Then Margaret introduced the forensic handwriting analysis, Dr. Elaine Marsh's 46-page report, condensed to its final paragraph. It is my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that the signature on the voluntary relinquishment of parental rights dated October 2005 was not produced by Richard A. Whitford. Gerald's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client has a legally executed adoption decree, approved by this court system nearly 2 decades ago. The petitioner is attempting to relitigate a settled matter based on a hired expert's opinion. Margaret didn't turn around. Your Honor, a decree built on a forged signature is not settled. It is concealed. We are here to unconceal it. I heard Ruth Kessler shift in the gallery behind me. A man I didn't recognize. Later I'd learn he was a courthouse reporter for the Richmond Times-Dispatch, wrote something in a narrow notebook. 2 women from Gerald's church sat in the second row, their faces tight with the particular discomfort of people watching a reputation disassemble in real time. Judge Dwyer looked at Gerald's lawyer over her glasses. The court will hear the petitioner's full presentation. Continue, Ms. Hale. Margaret moved to the financial records, and this was where the air in the courtroom changed. She projected the Title IV-E disbursement summary onto the courtroom screen, the same document I'd pulled from a garbage bag 6 months ago. Month by month, year by year, a column of numbers running down the page like a ledger of my childhood. Mr. Talbot, Margaret said, The judge had permitted direct questioning. The state of Virginia paid your household $810 per month in adoption assistance for the care of the child placed with you. Over approximately 18 years, that totals $174,960. Can you tell the court how those funds were allocated toward the child's welfare? Gerald straightened in his chair. Everything went to the girl. We fed her, clothed her, kept a roof over her head. 18 years of that isn't cheap. Margaret nodded as though she'd expected this answer, which she had. Then she called Derek Simmons. Derek approached the stand carrying his report like a man carrying something heavy and important. He'd visited the Talbot home. He'd reviewed the records. He spoke without inflection, which made every fact land harder. The child's living space was a converted storage area adjacent to the home's water heater. Approximately 60 square feet. No exterior window, no closet. The mattress showed visible wear and water damage consistent with curbside salvage. I found no medical records for the child after age 14. No pediatric visits, no dental records, no immunizations after 8th grade. The child had no state-issued identification, no social security card in her possession, and no documented access to her own adoption file. He looked at the judge. In my professional assessment, Your Honor, the living conditions described and observed are consistent with child neglect, not with the intended purpose of adoption assistance funds. Donna started crying. Softly at first, then louder. The performed kind of crying that draws eyes. Gerald squeezed her hand and set his jaw, projecting the image of a husband protecting a fragile wife from unfair accusations. But Ruth Kessler was next. She took the stand in a navy cardigan and sensible flats, and she didn't perform anything. I've lived next to that family for 12 years, Ruth said. I watched that girl mow their lawn, wash their cars, hang laundry in the backyard while the other daughter, the biological one, sunbathed on a lounge chair. I never once saw Allison, Hillary, sit at their dinner table when guests were present. And on the night of Mr. Talbot's birthday, I watched him strike her across the face in front of 30 people because she gave him a gift he thought was beneath him. The courtroom was quiet in the way a room is quiet when everyone in it is recalculating what they thought they knew. Margaret waited for Ruth to step down, then turned back to Gerald. Mr. Talbot, do you know a man named Leonard Grubb? Gerald didn't blink. No. Margaret produced a photograph, printed on glossy stock, date stamped in the corner. 2 men standing at a folding table at an outdoor event. One was Gerald, 10 years younger. Polo shirt, paper plate in hand. The other was a thin man with glasses and a Virginia DSS lanyard around his neck. This was taken at the First Baptist Church community picnic in June 2004, Margaret said. 1 year before the adoption was finalized. The man beside you is Leonard Grubb, the social worker assigned to Hillary Whitford's case. Do you still maintain you don't know him? Gerald's jaw worked. I may have met him in passing. Church events are large. I don't remember every face. You remember well enough to send him $5,000. Margaret placed the bank statement on the projector. Gerald's personal checking account. October 14th, 2005. Wire transfer. Recipient. Leonard M. Grubb. Can you explain this payment? That was a donation. For the church's... It was a community contribution. Routed from your personal account directly to Mr. Grubb's personal account? Not the church's account? Gerald turned to his lawyer, who was studying the table surface with the intensity of a man hoping to find an exit there. No objection came. I gave that girl everything. Gerald's voice cracked upward, sharp as a slap. He was standing now, one hand flat on the table. 18 years, a home, food, and this is the thanks I get? Some con man shows up and suddenly I'm the villain? Mr. Talbot. Judge Dwyer's voice was low and final. Sit down, now. He sat. But the room had already heard it, the mask cracking, the entitlement spilling through. In the gallery, the churchwomen stared at their laps. The courthouse reporter's pen moved faster. Margaret turned to the judge with the composure of someone who had just watched her opponent do her job for her. Your Honor, we'd like the court to note Mr. Talbot's characterization of his parental role as something he gave and expects repayment for. That is not parenting. That is a transaction. Margaret looked at me. I'd told her the night before, I want to speak. Not because the case needed it. The documents were enough. But because I'd been silent for 21 years and some things need to be said by the person who lived them. Your Honor, the petitioner's daughter would like to address the court if permitted. Judge Dwyer nodded. You may proceed. I stood. Navy blazer, white blouse, hands at my sides. I looked at the judge, not at Gerald, because this wasn't for him. Your Honor, I'm not here for revenge. The word sat in the air for a moment, and I let it. I'm here because for 21 years I didn't know who I was. I didn't know my own name. I didn't know my mother's face. I didn't know that someone was looking for me, or that the papers that put me in that house were built on a forged signature. I paused, breathed. Mr. Talbot said he gave me everything. Here's what everything looked like. A storage closet with no window. A mattress from someone's curb. No doctor visits after age 14. No identification. No birth certificate. I didn't know my own social security number until 2 weeks ago. I worked in that house from the time I was 8 years old. Cooking, cleaning, doing laundry. And I was told every day that I should be grateful for it. That without them, I was nothing. My voice didn't break. I'd decided it wouldn't. He slapped me at his birthday party because I gave him a wallet I'd saved 3 months to buy. But the truth is, he slapped me because I wouldn't sign a paper giving him continued control over my life. That's what I was to him. Not a daughter. A line item. I looked at the judge. I'm not asking this court to punish Gerald Talbot. I'm asking this court to tell the truth. Because I deserve at least that. Every child in the system deserves that. I sat down. The room was silent. Ruth Kessler was crying, quietly. The real kind. The courthouse reporter had stopped writing and was just looking at me. Richard sat perfectly still with his hands folded on the table, but I could see the knuckles white. When I stood in that courtroom, I remember thinking, why did it take me 21 years to say something this simple? Have you ever held something inside for so long that when you finally say it out loud, you're amazed it was only a few sentences? That all that weight could fit into so few words? If you know what that feels like, tell me in the comments, because I think that's the kind of thing you can't explain to someone who hasn't carried it. What happened next, no one expected. Least of all, Gerald. Donna stood up, not from the witness stand. She hadn't been called. She stood from the respondent's bench, smoothed the front of her Ann Taylor dress the way she smoothed everything, and said, in a voice that shook like a wire about to snap, Your Honor, I have something I need to say. Gerald grabbed her wrist. Donna, sit down. She pulled free. It was the first time I'd ever seen her pull free of anything. I wrote the check, Donna said. Her mascara was already running, but this wasn't the performed crying from earlier. This was different. Raw, ugly, the kind that doesn't care about an audience. $5,000 to Leonard Grubb. Gerald told me it was to expedite the adoption process. I wrote the check from our joint account, and I knew what it meant. Gerald's lawyer put his head in his hands. Gerald went red from the collar up, a deep mottled crimson I'd never seen on him before. She's lying, Gerald said. She's confused. She's trying to protect herself. I am trying to protect myself. Donna's voice broke high and desperate. Because I've been protecting you for 18 years, and I can't do it anymore. I watched you hit that girl. I watched you work her like a mule. And I didn't say anything because I was afraid of you, Gerald. I was afraid of exactly this. Judge Dwyer let her finish. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above us. Megan sat frozen in the gallery, phone in her lap, mouth open. Mr. Talbot, the judge said, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen a great deal and was still capable of being appalled. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. Gerald sat still as stone, and for the first time in my life, I saw him look afraid. Judge Dwyer took 12 minutes to review the final documents. 12 minutes. I know because I watched the clock on the courtroom wall. The old analog kind with a second hand that ticks instead of sweeps, and counted every rotation. When she looked up, she didn't address Gerald first. She addressed me. Ms. Whitford. And I will use that name now, because the evidence before this court compels it. The court has reviewed the petition, the forensic handwriting analysis, the financial records, the testimony of the social worker and the neighbor witness, the DNA results, and the statement made voluntarily by Mrs. Talbot. She removed her glasses. The evidence is unambiguous. The voluntary relinquishment of parental rights filed in October 2005 bears a signature that has been determined, by certified forensic analysis, to be fraudulent. The biological father, Richard Whitford, never consented to the termination of his parental rights. The adoption that followed was therefore built on a foundation of forgery and, based on the financial evidence presented, facilitated by a direct payment to the case-assigned social worker. She turned to Gerald. He was sitting rigidly upright, tie still knotted, hands flat on the table. A man holding the posture of authority, while the authority drained out of him. It is the ruling of this court that the adoption of Hilary Whitford, styled as Alison Grace Talbot, is declared void ab initio. The adoption is annulled in its entirety. Gerald didn't move. Furthermore, the court orders Gerald and Donna Talbot to make full restitution of all Title IV adoption assistance funds received, totaling $174,960, to the Commonwealth of Virginia. Donna let out a sound that wasn't quite a word. Finally, this court is referring the matter to the Henrico County District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential criminal charges, including but not limited to forgery in violation of Virginia Code Section 18.2-172, fraud in connection with public assistance, and child neglect under Section 18.2-371.1. The judge set down her papers. The child's legal name is restored to Hilary Whitford, effective immediately. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down, and the sound of it, that single wooden knock, was the loudest thing I'd ever heard in my life. Louder than the slap. Louder than 18 years of silence. It sounded like a lock opening. In the gallery, Ruth Kessler pressed both hands to her mouth. The churchwomen were already standing, gathering their purses, not making eye contact with each other. The courthouse reporter closed his notebook and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite name. Something between respect and sadness. Gerald sat motionless. His lawyer was already packing up, and for the first time I realized that the man Gerald had hired to defend him couldn't get out of that room fast enough. The hallway outside the courtroom smelled like floor wax and old radiator heat. I was walking toward the exit with Richard on one side and Margaret on the other when I heard the heels. Fast, uneven, the sound of someone not used to hurrying in shoes that weren't built for it. Wait. Megan. Her makeup was ruined. Mascara tracked down both cheeks. Foundation patchy where she'd wiped at it. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, which was strange because she'd always taken up so much space. I didn't know, she said. She was breathing hard like she'd been running or trying not to. About the money, the subsidy. I thought Mom and Dad were paying for my school out of Dad's salary. I didn't know it was... She stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence, and I understood why. The sentence ended with your money, and saying it out loud would make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. I looked at her. The girl who'd gotten the Apple Watch, the Toyota Camry, the queen bed, the highlighted hair, the credit card that never declined, the girl who'd laughed when Gerald hit me and filmed it on her phone, the girl who'd asked if she could turn my closet into storage for her shoes. Part of me wanted to scream. Part of me wanted to walk away without a word. But what I felt, standing there in a courthouse hallway with my legal name restored and my actual father beside me, wasn't rage. It was clarity. I hope you figure out who you are without his money, Megan, I said. I really do. But that's your journey, not mine. She nodded once, and I saw something pass across her face. Not guilt exactly, but the beginning of it. The hairline fracture before the break. Margaret touched my arm lightly. Richard was holding the door open. I walked toward them and didn't look back. Not because I was angry, but because for the first time I had somewhere to walk toward instead of just away from. Gerald was standing at the bottom of the courthouse steps. He looked diminished. Not physically. He was still a big man, still broad in the shoulders, but something structural had given way. His tie was loosened. His suit jacket was unbuttoned. Donna sat in their Buick at the curb, forehead against the steering wheel, engine running. I was halfway down the steps when he said it. The name he'd assigned me 21 years ago, the name a judge had just struck from the record. Allison. I stopped, turned. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was something he owned and couldn't quite figure out the value of. But now there was something else underneath it. Something that might have been fear if Gerald Talbot were the kind of man who admitted to being afraid. After everything I did for you, he said, after 18 years under my roof, this is how you repay me. I stood on the steps in my navy blazer with October sunlight on my shoulders, and I felt, for the first time, the full weight of what he'd just said. Not anger. Recognition. Because even now, even with the judge's ruling still ringing in the air, even with a forensic report proving he'd forged a man's signature to steal that man's daughter, Gerald Talbot believed he was owed something. My name is Hillary, I said, and you didn't do anything for me. You did everything to me, and now it's over. I turned and walked down the remaining steps. Richard was waiting by the Escalade, door open. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He just held the door the way you hold a door for someone you've been waiting 18 years to hold a door for. I got in. The door closed. And the last thing I saw through the tinted window was Gerald Talbot standing alone on the courthouse steps, suit jacket hanging open, watching his investment drive away. 6 months later. That's where I am now. I live in Richmond. Not the Fan District house with the red door, though Richard offered it. I have an apartment off Gray Street, a studio with tall windows that let in so much morning light, I sometimes just stand there for a minute before starting my day. The windows were the first thing I looked for when I went apartment hunting. I spent 18 years in a room without one. Now I need to see the sky when I wake up. I'm studying for my GED. I'm also enrolled in the culinary program at Reynolds Community College, which is ironic, I know. Gerald made me cook every meal for 18 years, and now I'm choosing it. But that's the difference, isn't it? Between something done to you and something you decide to do. The ingredients are the same. The meaning is completely different. Richard and I have dinner every Sunday at the bungalow. He's not a great cook. His specialty is overcooked salmon and slightly burned garlic bread. But he makes it himself, and he sets the table for two, and he asks me about my week, and listens to the answer. We're not perfect. There are awkward silences. There are moments when neither of us knows what to say, because you can't recover 18 stolen years over salmon. But he's there, every Sunday, without fail. As for the Talbots, Gerald and Donna are awaiting trial. Forgery, fraud, child neglect. The house in Henrico County is under a second mortgage to cover the restitution payment. Gerald was asked to resign from his position at First Baptist's Board of Deacons. He did not go quietly. Donna, who cooperated with the investigation, may receive a reduced charge. Megan moved in with an aunt in Fredericksburg and got a job at a retail store. The first job she's ever had. I go to therapy every Thursday. A woman named Dr. Torres who has a small office with a ficus plant and doesn't tell me how to feel. She just asks questions and lets me find my own answers, which, after 21 years of being told what to think, feels like learning a new language. Healing doesn't happen overnight. Some mornings I still wake up at 5 a.m. with my heart racing, already mentally cataloging chores that no longer exist. But then I open the curtains, and there's the sky, and I remember where I am. I want to be clear about something before I go. This story isn't about revenge. I know it might look that way. The courtroom, the ruling, the restitution order, the criminal charges. But revenge would mean I wanted Gerald to suffer the way I suffered, and I don't. I want him to be held accountable. Those are different things. Revenge is a fire you light hoping it burns someone else. Accountability is just turning on the lights so everyone can see what was already there. If you're in a family where you're tolerated instead of loved, where your presence is endured, not valued, where you've been taught that gratitude means silence and obedience means survival, I want you to hear this. You are not the problem. You were never the problem. The people who made you feel like a burden were carrying their own debts, and they put the weight on you because you were small enough to accept it. You deserve to know your own name. Family isn't paperwork. It isn't a court decree or an adoption file or a signature, forged or otherwise. Family is the person who sits with you while you learn to trust again. The person who says of course when you ask for proof instead of faith. The person who holds the door and doesn't ask you to be grateful for it. Last Sunday, Richard and I sat on the porch of the bungalow on the Fan District Street, the one with the red door. He was drinking coffee. I was reading. Neither of us was talking, and it was the most comfortable silence I've ever known. At one point, he looked over and said, "I'm glad you're here." And I said, "Me too." My name is Hillary Whitford, and for the first time in my life, I know exactly who I am. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story made you feel something, anger, relief, recognition, or just the quiet understanding that you've been in a room like that too, write it in the comments. I read everyone. And if you want to hear what happened to a woman whose in-laws threw her out of the house on Christmas Eve, that story's in the description below. Click it. I promise you won't regret it. Until next time. Take care of yourselves, and if someone's still telling you that you should be grateful for being mistreated, you have permission to stop listening. Fly home. Don't say anything to your mother and brother. That text came in at 6:47 a.m. while I sat on a sunlit balcony in Hilton Head Island, watching my mother laugh for the first time in 21 years. At something my brother said. An unknown number. No name. 7 words that turned my stomach to ice. 12 hours later, I was standing in the arrivals hall of Hartford Bradley Airport. A man in a gray suit held a sign with my name. Next to him, 2 police officers. And what they showed me in that conference room. I don't remember hitting the floor. I just remember waking up to fluorescent lights and a paramedic asking me to count backward from 10. That was 4 months ago. I still don't sleep through the night. But I need to tell you everything. Because what my family did, and what I did about it, changed who I am forever. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and your local time in the comments. My name is Willow Farrell. I'm 32 years old, and this is the story of how my own mother and brother tried to destroy me, and how the truth saved my life. Now let me take you back to a rainy November night in Glastonbury, Connecticut. The night I stopped being someone's daughter. I was 11 years old. It was a Tuesday, November 14th. I remember the date because I'd brought home a permission slip for a field trip to the Wadsworth Atheneum, the art museum in Hartford. I needed a parent's signature and $3. That's it. A signature and $3. My mother, Margaret Farrell, was sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. She had the phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was calm, flat, like she was reading a grocery list. "It's done," she said. "She's leaving tonight." I didn't know who she was talking to. I still don't. She hung up and looked at me the way you'd look at a stain on a countertop, something to wipe clean. "Pack your things," she said. I thought she meant for the field trip. I actually smiled. "You're leaving, tonight." My brother Dean stood at the top of the stairs. He was 14. He watched the whole thing, didn't say a word, didn't move, just leaned on the railing like he was watching a show that didn't concern him. My mother opened the front door. Rain was hammering the porch. She handed me a black garbage bag, the kind you use for yard waste, and said 4 words I will hear for the rest of my life. "Go, don't come back." No suitcase, no coat, no explanation, no $3. I walked 3 miles in that rain, my sneakers filled with water by the second block. The garbage bag ripped at the corner of Hebron Avenue, and my library book fell into a puddle. I made it to my grandfather's house on Hubbard Street at 9:20. When he opened the door, he didn't ask what happened. He didn't call Margaret. He just knelt on the wet porch, wrapped his arms around me, and said, "You're home now, little bird." That was the last time anyone in my family held me for 21 years. My grandfather, Walter Ashford, was a retired civil engineer who lived like he'd never earned a dollar past his pension. Small Cape Cod house, vegetable garden out back. A workshop in the garage where he fixed clocks, radios, anything with gears. He wore the same 3 flannel shirts on rotation and drank his coffee black from a mug that said, "World's okayest Grandpa." My grandmother Rosemary was the warmth in that house. She taught me how to make pot roast on Sundays. She braided my hair before school. She read to me every night, even when I was 12 and probably too old for it. I never stopped her. For 7 years, that small house on Hubbard Street was the only place I felt real. Margaret never called. Not once. Dean didn't write. No birthday card, no Christmas visit. Nothing. It was as if I'd been erased from their lives with the same ease my mother used to wipe the kitchen counter. My grandfather never forced the subject. But once, when I was 13 and crying in the garage because a girl at school asked why my mom didn't come to the parent conference, he set down his wrench and said something I didn't understand until decades later. "Someday you'll understand why I'm saving the best for you. Not now, but someday." I noticed things. Small things. A man in a gray suit who visited my grandfather every few months. They'd sit in the study with the door closed. I'd hear low voices but never full sentences. When I asked who the man was, Grandpa said, "An old friend helping with paperwork." I didn't push. I was just grateful to have a home. My grandmother Rosemary passed when I was 16. A stroke, quick and merciful. And the house on Hubbard Street got a little quieter, a little colder. But my grandfather kept going. For me, I think. He drove me to campus tours. He proofread my college essays. He kept a locked oak box on the top shelf of his closet that he never opened in front of me. I asked him once what was inside. He smiled and said, "Your future." My grandfather died in his sleep 3 weeks before I started college. I found him on a Saturday morning, still in his flannel, one hand resting on a book about covered bridges. He looked peaceful. He looked done. The funeral was small. 6 neighbors, the pastor from the Methodist church on Main Street, a woman who ran the hardware store where Grandpa bought his nails, and then Margaret walked in. I hadn't seen my mother in 7 years. She wore black from head to toe. A silver cross hung from her neck. She moved through the church like a widow in a movie, touching pews, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, whispering, "Thank you," to strangers who offered condolences. She never looked at me. Not once. But Dean did. He walked right up to where I was sitting in the front pew, leaned down, and said something so quietly that only I could hear it. "Grandpa left everything to Mom. There's nothing for you." Then he smiled. A quick one. The kind that vanishes before anyone else sees it. After the service, a man approached me in the parking lot. Gray suit. I recognized him. The man who used to visit Grandpa's study. "Miss Farrell," he said. "My name is Thomas Mercer. I was your grandfather's attorney for 30 years. He held out a cream-colored envelope, sealed with wax. Old-fashioned, deliberate. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this when the time is right." He paused. "The time isn't now, but keep my card." I took the card. I took the envelope. I put both in my wallet and didn't touch them again. I rode the bus back to my dorm alone that night. No family left, no safety net. 18 years old with a sealed envelope I was too afraid to open, and a business card from a man in a gray suit who said, "The time isn't now." I didn't know that those 2 pieces of paper would save my life 14 years later. I paid for college the way a lot of people do. Scholarships, part-time jobs, and ramen noodles 5 nights a week. I studied computer science at UConn, graduated with honors, and moved to San Francisco with $600 and a carry-on suitcase. I didn't call it ambition back then. I called it not having a choice. By 24, I was working 80-hour weeks at a startup in Soma, writing code for an app I didn't believe in, eating lunch at my desk, and sleeping in a studio apartment the size of a parking space. Nobody in my family knew where I was. Nobody asked. But something was growing. Not resentment. Purpose. I kept thinking about the kids I'd met in college who'd aged out of foster care with nothing. No family. No guidance. No one to call when the landlord raised the rent or the car broke down or the loneliness got so heavy it pressed on their chest like concrete. I knew that feeling. I'd lived it. At 27, I built Hearthline. It was a simple platform. Match kids aging out of the system with volunteer mentors who'd show up. Not charity. Presence. Someone to answer the phone. By 30, a venture fund believed in it enough to invest. The company was valued at $47 million. On paper, I was wealthy. In practice, I was still the girl in sneakers walking 3 miles in the rain. My only real friend was Grace Kimball, a nurse I'd met at the Yukon Library freshman year. She was from Brockton, Massachusetts. Direct, stubborn. The kind of person who'd tell you your haircut was terrible before asking how your day went. Grace knew everything about my past, and she had one rule about my family. If they ever come back, she told me once over Thai food in the mission, it's not because they miss you, it's because they need something. I believed her. Mostly, but there's a difference between believing something in your head and believing it in the part of you that still keeps a garbage bag in the back of your closet, just in case. One night, years later, I found a line buried in my Yukon financial aid records. Part of my scholarship had been funded by an anonymous educational trust. No name, no trail, just a deposit every semester like clockwork. I couldn't trace it. But I had a feeling I already knew. The call came on a Wednesday, 9:14 p.m. Pacific Time. I was on my couch in San Francisco, half watching a documentary about bridge engineering, a habit I'd inherited from Grandpa, when my phone lit up with a Connecticut area code. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. Willow? The voice was older, shakier, but unmistakable. It's your mother. Silence. Mine, not hers. I know I don't deserve this call. She told me she'd been diagnosed with early-stage cancer. She said she'd been going to church every week. She said she'd changed. She said the word sorry 4 times in 2 minutes, and each time it sounded more rehearsed than the last. Then she said the thing that cracked me open. I want us to be together. All of us. Before it's too late. A vacation. Hilton Head Island. As a family. She paused. Dean wants to apologize too. I said no. She cried. I hung up and called Grace. Cancer card? Grace said. Classic manipulation. Don't go. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. I stared at the ceiling and argued with myself the way only someone who's been abandoned can argue. Half logic, half that desperate little voice that still whispers, maybe this time will be different. On the 3rd night, I picked up the framed photo on my nightstand. Me and Grandpa, sitting on his porch, the summer I was 15. He was smiling like he knew something I didn't. He'd want me to try. I was sure of it. I called Margaret back. I'll come. 3 days. Not 5. I'm booking my own flight and my own room. She agreed to everything instantly. No pushback? No negotiation. That should have been my first warning. 20 minutes later, a text from an unknown number. Be careful. 2 words. No name. I thought it was spam. I deleted it. That was my second warning. And I missed it completely. Hilton Head in late September is the kind of beautiful that feels borrowed, like it can't possibly last. Spanish moss, salt air, sunset light that makes everything look like a painting someone forgot to sign. I flew into Savannah and drove the 45 minutes to the resort, a beachfront property, valet parking, the kind of place that puts orchids in the lobby and charges $12 for orange juice. Dean had booked it. I didn't ask with whose money. Margaret was waiting in the lobby. She looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. Her hair had gone silver at the temples, and she wore a pale blue cardigan that made her look like a Sunday school teacher. When she saw me, she opened her arms and started crying before I even reached her. "You're so beautiful," she said into my shoulder. "You look just like your grandmother." Dean stood behind her, taller now, broader, a pressed linen shirt, leather watch, salon-quality smile. He extended his hand like we were meeting at a business conference. "Hey sis, long time." He introduced his girlfriend, Amber Jennings. 28. Blonde hair, straight teeth, quick laugh. She shook my hand with both of hers and said, "I've heard so much about you," in a voice that sounded like customer service. Dinner that first night was almost normal. Almost. Margaret talked about her church group. Dean talked about his real estate career. Amber laughed at all of Dean's jokes. Nobody mentioned the 21 years, but I noticed things. Dean asked twice what I did for a living. Then he asked if I rented or owned. Then, "Are you comfortable? Financially, I mean. Families should take care of each other." I gave vague answers, smiled, ate my fish, and when I got back to my room, I checked my phone. A new text from that same unknown number. "Did your brother ask about money yet?" This time, I didn't delete it. I took a screenshot. The next morning, Margaret suggested family photos on the beach. "Something to remember this by," she said. I agreed. What harm could photos do? Plenty, it turns out, when your mother uses them as a stage. She flagged down a resort employee to take the pictures, and while the young woman adjusted the angle, Margaret leaned in and said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "My daughter came back to me after years of running away. She's always been the stubborn one." Running away, as if I'd left by choice. As if I hadn't been pushed out a door at 11 with a trash bag in the rain. I didn't correct her. I stood there in the sand with my arm around a woman who'd rewritten my childhood for an audience of strangers, and I smiled for the camera. Dropped half an octave. Look, I'll be dropped half an octave. Look, I'll be honest. I've hit some rough patches, a few debts, nothing major. He shrugged like a man describing a parking ticket. Have you ever thought about investing together, as siblings? I'm not in a position to invest, I said. He pivoted fast. You know Grandpa left everything to Mom, right? His house, his savings? Not a lot, honestly. He was watching my face, testing. I didn't know the details, I said. Which was true. That night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard voices in the hallway outside my door. Margaret and Dean. Low, tense. She doesn't know, Margaret said. Keep going. She's suspicious, Dean replied. Then be better at it. I pressed my back against the bathroom wall. My toothbrush was still in my mouth. My hands were shaking. I waited until the hallway went quiet. Then I picked up my phone and texted the unknown number. Who are you? 3 minutes passed. Then, someone your grandfather trusted. Morning, day 3. The last day I'd agreed to stay. Dean came to breakfast carrying a manila folder. He set it on the table between the salt shaker and the butter dish, casual as a newspaper. So, I've been looking into Grandpa's estate, he said. Turns out there's property and accounts that were never properly distributed. He opened the folder and slid a stapled document toward me. Mom and I think it's fair if we all sign this, just to consolidate things under one family trust. I picked it up. The header read, Family Trust Agreement, Ashford/Farrell Estate. I'm not a lawyer, but I've spent 5 years reviewing contracts for my company. I know what a power of attorney clause looks like when it's dressed up in family language. And this document was handing Dean full control over every asset tied to the Ashford name. I need time to read this properly, I said. It's just a formality. Dean leaned back. Mom already signed. Margaret pulled my hand back. I said I need time. Pulled my hand back. I said I need time. Dean's jaw tightened. Amber glanced at him, then looked down at her phone. Back in my room, I photographed every page and sent the images to my attorney in San Francisco. 2 hours later, he called. Don't sign anything, he said. This document would give your brother control over assets you might not even know you have. I sat on the edge of the bed. My phone buzzed. The unknown number. Longer this time. Fly home. Don't say anything to your mother and brother. There's a flight at 6 a.m. from Savannah. Take it. A car will be waiting at Hartford. Don't be afraid. I sat on that bed for an hour staring at the message. My hands were shaking. I kept thinking, what if this is a scam? What if someone is trying to separate me from my family again? But then I thought, what family? The one that kicked me out at 11? The one that just slid a trap across the breakfast table and called it legacy? I had to choose, and I chose to trust a stranger over my own blood. Would you have done the same? I still don't know if it was courage or just survival instinct. Let me know in the comments, because even now, 4 months later, I go back and forth. I set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. and didn't sleep at all. 4:30 a.m. Still dark. The resort hallway smelled like chlorine and hibiscus. I grabbed my carry-on. I never unpack fully in places I might need to leave, and took the service stairs to the ground floor. No checkout. No note. I ordered an Uber from the parking lot and watched the resort shrink in the rearview mirror as we pulled onto Highway 278. The driver was a retired schoolteacher named Donna. She asked if I was heading home. I said yes. That was the truest thing I'd said in 3 days. At Savannah Hilton Head International, I checked in for the 6 a.m. flight to Hartford. The gate was half empty. A businessman, a mother with a sleeping toddler. Me, sitting in a plastic chair with a coffee I couldn't drink, rehearsing goodbye speeches I'd never give. I texted Grace from the boarding line. Something is very wrong. I'm leaving. I'll call you when I land. Grace, bless her. Thank God. The plane lifted off at 6:05. I watched the coastline tilt and fall away. The island, the resort, the family I'd let myself believe in for 72 stupid, hopeful hours. My phone buzzed at 7:30. Dean. Where are you? Mom is worried sick. Then Margaret. Willow, please don't do this to me again. Then Dean, 1 minute later. We need to talk about the trust. It's important. 3 messages in 10 minutes. Concern, guilt, then pressure. A perfect escalation. I'd watched Margaret do this my whole childhood. The soft open, the wounded middle, the sharp close. Dean had learned well. I turned off my phone and leaned my forehead against the window. And that's when I felt it in my jacket pocket. A business card, soft with age, its edges worn to felt. Thomas Mercer, attorney at law. I'd carried it in my wallet for 14 years, transferred it to jacket after jacket, never knowing why I couldn't throw it away. Now I knew. Hartford Bradley Airport, Gate B4. I walked through the jetway with my carry-on over one shoulder and the feeling that I was about to step into someone else's story. I was right. A man stood in the arrivals area holding a small sign, W. Farrell. Gray suit, silver hair, 70-ish. Beside him, 2 Connecticut State Police officers in pressed uniforms, hands at their sides, not aggressive, but present. The man lowered the sign when he saw me. Miss Farrell, my name is Thomas Mercer. I was your grandfather Walter Ashford's attorney for 30 years. He offered his hand. Steady grip, kind eyes. We need to talk, privately. They led me to a small conference room near the airline offices. Beige walls, a round table, 4 chairs. Thomas sat across from me and placed 3 items on the table with the precision of a man who'd rehearsed this moment. A bound document, a sealed envelope, cream-colored, wax seal, handwriting I recognized as my grandmother Rosemary's, and a thick folder, tabbed and labeled. Your grandfather drafted this will in 2012, Thomas said. It names you, Willow Farrell, as the sole beneficiary of his entire estate. I stared at him. That includes the house on Hubbard Street, savings accounts, investment holdings accumulated over 40 years. He paused. The estimated value is $2.8 million. The room tilted. I gripped the table. He instructed me to execute the will when 2 conditions were met. First, you turned 32. Second, your family made contact with you. Why those conditions? Because he knew they'd only come back if they found out about the money. Thomas opened the thick folder. But that's not why the police are here. He spread a series of printed screenshots across the table. Text messages. Between Dean and a contact saved as V. The first one read, "She's here. Room 412. If she doesn't sign by Thursday, go to Plan B." The reply, "Plan B costs double." Dean's response, "Whatever it takes." Thomas introduced the woman sitting quietly at the end of the table. I hadn't noticed her when I walked in, which I'd later learn was the whole point. "This is Rachel Dunn," Thomas said. "Private investigator. I hired her 6 weeks ago, the day your mother called you." Rachel was compact. 40s. Short brown hair, no jewelry, a face that gave nothing away. She opened a laptop and turned it toward me. "Your brother owes $340,000, she said. "Mostly online gambling. His creditors are not patient people." She clicked through a timeline. Dean had discovered the will 6 months earlier by breaking into the vacant house on Hubbard Street and finding a draft copy in Grandpa's desk. "He told your mother." Together, they devised the vacation plan. Rachel's voice was clinical, precise. "Step 1. Reconnect. Step 2. Get you to sign the family trust document, transferring control to Dean. Step 3. She pulled up a new set of messages. Dean to V. A man named Victor, with a criminal record for aggravated assault and extortion. If she doesn't sign, we go to Plan B. What's Plan B? Make it look like an accident. She doesn't know anyone here. Balcony. Pool. Whatever's clean. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. "Your brother was arranging your murder," Rachel said. Then she showed me the message I couldn't look away from. Dean to Margaret. Time-stamped 2 days before the trip. "She's not signing. We may need the backup plan." Margaret's reply, "Do what you have to do. Just keep me out of it." My own mother. 8 words. No hesitation. I stood up. I said, "Excuse me." I walked to the restroom at the end of the hall. I locked the door. And I cried in a way I hadn't cried since I was 11, standing in the rain with a garbage bag. My whole body convulsed. The fluorescent light buzzed above me like a hive. When I came back to the table, my eyes were swollen and my voice was raw, but I was done falling apart. "What do we do now?" I said. Thomas began explaining the next steps: legal filings, coordination with law enforcement, protective measures. He was halfway through a sentence about a restraining order when the room narrowed to a pinpoint and the floor rushed up to meet me. I woke on my back. A paramedic was kneeling beside me, pressing 2 fingers to my wrist. "You're okay," he said. "Your blood pressure dropped. Can you count backward from 10? I counted. I stared at the ceiling tiles. I thought about Grandpa opening the door in the rain, kneeling on the wet porch, not asking questions. He knew this would happen. Maybe not the details. Not Victor, not the balcony, not the pool. But he knew the shape of it. He knew what Margaret and Dean were capable of, and he spent his last years building a wall between them and me. Thomas sat in the chair beside me, patient as a clock. He handed me a paper cup of water. "Take your time," he said. "But don't take too long. Your brother doesn't know you've left yet." I sat up, drank the water, steadied my voice. "I don't want revenge," I said. "I want the truth on the table. All of it." Thomas nodded like he'd been waiting for exactly those words. Then he reached into his briefcase and set down the sealed envelope. Cream-colored, wax seal, my grandmother's handwriting. The same one he'd given me at Grandpa's funeral 14 years ago. "You never opened it," he said. I hadn't. I'd carried it across 6 apartments, 4 cities, and 1 entire career. It had traveled in jacket pockets and shoeboxes and the bottom of filing cabinets. I'd touched it 100 times and never broken the seal. "Open it when you're ready," Thomas said. "Your grandmother Rosemary wrote it the week before she passed." I slipped the envelope into my bag. Not yet, but soon. First, I had a brother to stop. Thomas arranged a room at a hotel in Hartford. Quiet, clean, away from anything with the name Farrell attached to it. Grace flew in from Boston that same night. She walked through the door, dropped her bag, and wrapped her arms around me without a word. Then she said what Grace always says. I told you not to go. I know. I leaned into her shoulder. But if I didn't go, they would have found me eventually. She didn't argue. She knew I was right. While Grace ordered room service, I couldn't eat. The machinery of consequences was grinding forward 2 states away. Connecticut State Police had coordinated with law enforcement in South Carolina. The plan was clean. Arrest Victor first at Hilton Head, then take Dean the following morning back in Glastonbury. I sat on the hotel bed while Grace dozed in the armchair. Midnight. The city hummed outside the window. I pulled the envelope from my bag. The wax cracked like a whisper. Inside, 1 sheet of stationery, pale yellow, and a photograph. Rosemary's handwriting was careful, deliberate, the kind of penmanship they taught in schools that don't exist anymore. My dearest Willow, if you're reading this, it means your grandfather is gone and I'm gone, and someone is trying to take what's yours. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I want you to know, you were never the problem. Your mother was broken long before you were born, and she broke you instead of fixing herself. You deserve the world, little bird. Build your own nest. Grandma R. The photograph. Me at 5 years old, sitting on Rosemary's lap, both of us laughing at something outside the frame. On the back, in pencil, 4 words. You were always enough. Grace woke up to find me sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding the photo, tears running silent and clean. She didn't ask. She sat beside me, took my hand, and stayed there. At 1:47 a.m., my phone lit up. Thomas. Victor has been arrested. He's cooperating. Your brother will be arrested at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. I set the phone down and looked at the photograph one more time. 5 years old. Laughing. Enough. 7 a.m. sharp. 2 unmarked cars pulled up to Margaret's house in Glastonbury. Dean was at the kitchen table eating cereal when they knocked. He answered the door in sweatpants. The officers read him his rights while Margaret screamed from the porch in a bathrobe, clutching the railing like the house was sinking. I know these details because Rachel Dunn sent me a brief report that afternoon. Clean. Factual. No editorializing. That was Rachel's way. Margaret's call came 40 minutes after the arrest. What have you done? She was hyperventilating. They took your brother. He didn't do anything. He hired someone to kill me, Mom. Silence, long enough to hear a clock ticking somewhere in her house. That's ridiculous. Dean would never. You're making this up to get back at us. The police have the messages, all of them. I let that settle, including yours. What messages? I read it from the screenshot on my phone, word for word. Do what you have to do, just keep me out of it. That was you. 10 seconds of nothing, then quieter. That was about the trust documents, not about hurting you. That's for the judge to decide. I hung up, set the phone face down on the nightstand, didn't pick it up again for 6 hours. Over the next few days, the pieces sorted themselves. Dean was held without bail. The nature of the charge, plus Victor's cooperation, made him a flight risk. Amber Jennings vanished. Checked out of the resort the morning of Dean's arrest, canceled her phone number, left no forwarding address. Thomas called that evening. We need to move on the inheritance claim. Your grandfather's property in Glastonbury has been sitting empty for 14 years. He paused. He left instructions about what to do with it. Margaret, meanwhile, had already hired an attorney. Within 24 hours, her lawyer filed a motion to invalidate the will, claiming Grandpa Walter had lacked testamentary capacity when he signed it. The fight for the truth was just beginning. Margaret had always been better at narrative than truth. Within 48 hours of Dean's arrest, she transformed herself from complicit mother into grieving victim. She posted on her church group's Facebook page, the one with 900 members and a shared prayer list. My daughter is trying to steal her grandfather's inheritance and put my innocent son in jail. Please pray for our family. It worked. My phone started ringing. Numbers I hadn't seen in 20 years. Some callers were polite, cautious even. Others were not. A woman from Margaret's Bible study left a voicemail calling me ungrateful. A man whose name I didn't recognize said I should be ashamed of what I was doing to my poor mother. I didn't respond to any of them. There was no point in fighting a story that had been running for 21 years, but then a call came from someone I didn't expect. Willow? This is Patricia Boyd. I lived 3 houses down from your mother on Sunset Terrace. I remembered her. Barely. A tall woman with garden gloves who waved from her driveway. Your mother told everyone you ran away at 11 because you were a troubled kid, Mrs. Boyd said. Her voice was steady but thin. I believed her for 20 years. She paused. But last week I saw the police report. What police report? The night you left. A neighbor, me, actually, called the police because I saw a child walking alone in the rain carrying a garbage bag. An officer went to your mother's house. She told him you'd gone to stay with relatives voluntarily. They closed the case. A police report. Filed the night I was thrown out. Margaret had lied to the officer's face and the case had simply disappeared. I didn't know about any of it. I'm calling because I owe you an apology, Mrs. Boyd said. I should have followed up. I should have looked harder. I didn't. Thomas later confirmed. Grandpa Walter had kept a copy of that police report. It was in the file alongside the will. He'd known about it from the beginning. And then Thomas told me something that broke me open all over again. Your grandfather tried to get legal custody of you, multiple times. Margaret threatened to accuse him of abuse if he didn't back off. He chose to protect you from the shadows instead. My grandfather had fought for me, and my mother had used a lie like a loaded gun to stop him. I didn't fight back on social media. I didn't post a rebuttal. I didn't call Margaret's church friends to plead my case. Instead, I did what Grandpa taught me. I built something. Thomas filed the petition to validate the will with the Hartford Probate Court. The hearing was set for 2 weeks out. Margaret's attorney had already submitted the diminished capacity argument, claiming Grandpa Walter was mentally unfit when he signed. It was a common tactic, Thomas said, and almost always a losing one when the signer had a clean psychiatric evaluation on file, which Grandpa Walter did, dated 2 weeks before the will was signed, conducted by Dr. Alan Fielding, a board-certified psychiatrist still practicing in New Haven. Full competency confirmed. But Thomas had more. He arrived at the hotel one afternoon carrying a wooden box. Oak. Old. Brass latch. I recognized it instantly. The box from Grandpa's top shelf. The one he never opened in front of me. Your grandfather's house has been sealed since his death, Thomas said. This was in the master closet. He left instructions that I should give it to you when the legal process began. I opened it. Inside, 7 leather-bound notebooks. Grandpa Walter's handwriting. A diary spanning 7 years. From the year I moved in to the year he died. I opened the first one at random. March 2009. Called Margaret again. She said Willow is better off without this family. Maybe she's right, but not in the way Margaret means it. He'd documented everything. Every phone call to Margaret. Every refusal. Every legal attempt to bring me home. Every quiet act of protection that I never knew about. Your grandfather didn't just plan for your future, Thomas said, adjusting his glasses. He documented the past. He knew this fight was coming. I called Mrs. Boyd that evening. Would you be willing to testify? I asked. About what you saw that night? About Margaret telling the police I'd gone to stay with relatives? Yes, she said, without hesitation. I should have done it 21 years ago. Meanwhile, Grace helped me connect with a nonprofit organization that specialized in transitional housing for youth aging out of foster care. Grandpa's house on Hubbard Street had been empty for 14 years. His will included a specific note about the property. Not a clause, not a condition. Just a line in the margins of his own handwriting. For the children who need a door opened. I was starting to see the full picture now. My grandfather hadn't just saved me. He'd designed a blueprint for what came next. He just didn't live long enough to hand me the key himself. 3 days before the hearing, Dean's defense attorney reached out to Thomas with an offer. Dean would plead guilty to criminal solicitation, a lesser charge, in exchange for Willow not pursuing civil damages. Thomas relayed the message over the phone. I don't want his money, I said. I want him to face what he did. That same afternoon, Margaret called. Not crying this time. No church voice. No trembling hands you could hear through the speaker. This Margaret was the one I remembered from childhood. The real one. Cold. Measured. Stripped of performance. Drop the charges, she said. Walk away, or I will make sure every person in this state knows what kind of daughter you are. What kind is that? The kind who destroys her own family. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. You destroyed this family 21 years ago on a rainy Tuesday night, I said. I was just the evidence. I hung up. Thomas spent that week assembling everything. The validated will, the psychiatric evaluation, the police report from 2003, Walter's diaries, the text messages between Dean and Victor, the text between Dean and Margaret, Mrs. Boyd's sworn statement, Rachel Dunn's investigative report. The courtroom will be full, Thomas warned me. Margaret's church friends, neighbors, local press may show up. Good, I said. The truth works best in the open. That night, alone in the hotel, I returned to the oak box. I'd read most of the diaries, but at the very bottom, beneath the last notebook, I found something I hadn't noticed before. A savings book, a college education fund. The name on the account, Willow Farrell. Opened the day I was born. The final entry was a deposit dated 3 months before Grandpa died, and on the last page, in his careful engineer's handwriting, for the nest you'll build yourself. Sitting there, holding that savings book with my name on it, a name my grandfather wrote on the day I was born, I realized something. He never forgot me, not for a single day. Even when I thought I was completely alone in the world, someone was quietly building a floor beneath me so I wouldn't fall through. I wonder, have you ever discovered, years later, that someone loved you in silence? That the luck you thought you had was actually someone's careful, invisible plan to keep you safe? If you have, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. I think we don't say these things often enough. I closed the box, set my alarm, and laid out my clothes for court. Tomorrow, the truth would have a room full of witnesses. Hartford Probate Court, Courtroom 3B, 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. The room was full. Margaret's church friends filled one side, a cluster of women in modest blouses, clutching purses, whispering. On the other side, Mrs. Boyd in a navy dress. Grace, steady as a wall. 2 reporters from the Hartford Courant with notebooks open, a sketch artist. And scattered throughout, neighbors from Glastonbury who'd come because small towns run on stories, and this was the biggest one in decades. Margaret sat at the respondents' table. Black dress, silver cross, a tissue balled in her right hand. Her attorney, a slender man with rimless glasses, shuffled papers with a confidence that would dissolve within the hour. The hearing opened. Margaret's lawyer presented the diminished capacity claim. He described Walter Ashford as elderly, isolated, possibly influenced by his attorney. He said the word confused 3 times. Thomas stood. He placed the psychiatric evaluation on the judge's bench. Signed, dated, unambiguous. Full cognitive competency, confirmed by Dr. Alan Fielding, 2 weeks before the will was executed. Then he opened the diary. He read aloud the entry from November 14th, 2003. The night I was thrown out. Grandpa's handwriting. Grandpa's words. Margaret called at 9 p.m., said she put Willow out. The child walked 3 miles in the rain to my door. She was 11. She was shaking. I called Margaret back. She said, "Keep her. I don't want her." The courtroom went quiet. Not church quiet. Grave quiet. Margaret shot to her feet. "That's a lie. He made that up." "Sit down, ma'am," the judge said. Thomas called Mrs. Boyd to the stand. She walked slowly, hands folded. She described the night. The rain, the child, the garbage bag, the 911 call. She described the officer going to Margaret's house. She described what Margaret told him. She said her daughter had gone to stay with family, Mrs. Boyd said, voluntarily. She looked directly at Margaret. That was a lie. I watched that little girl walk down the street soaking wet. There was nothing voluntary about it. One of the church women in the back set down her purse and didn't pick it up again. During the 15-minute recess, Margaret crossed the aisle and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was tight. Her eyes were dry now. No performance left. "You're killing me," she whispered. "Is that what you want?" I looked down at her hand on my arm. I removed it, gently, finger by finger, and met her eyes. "No, I just want the truth to have a voice." The judge returned. The room rearranged itself into silence. Thomas presented the final pieces, the psychiatric evaluation. The two signing witnesses, Dr. Alan Fielding and Martha Bowen, the town librarian. Both still alive, both prepared to confirm. The 20-year chain of custody that Thomas had maintained on every document. Clean, unbroken, airtight. The judge reviewed the file for 8 minutes that felt like 80. Then he spoke. "The court finds the will of Walter H. Ashford to be valid and duly executed. The petitioner, Willow Farrell, is recognized as the sole designated beneficiary." Margaret's head dropped. Not dramatically, not the way she'd performed grief at the funeral. This was real. Her shoulders folded in. Her attorney put his hand on her arm, and she shook it off. No one from the church pews moved to comfort her. Thomas wasn't finished. He informed the court that evidence pertaining to a related criminal matter, the conspiracy involving Dean Farrell, was being entered into the public record and forwarded to the criminal division. He presented the text messages, all of them. Dean to Victor. "Make it look natural. She doesn't know anyone here." Victor to Dean. "Plan B costs double." Dean to Margaret. "She's not signing. We may need the backup plan." And Margaret, in 8 words that echoed through that courtroom like a gunshot. "Do what you have to do. Just keep me out of it." The church women stared at Margaret as if she'd removed a mask they didn't know she was wearing. A reporter scribbled so fast her pen scratched audibly against her notepad. The judge noted that the criminal prosecution of Dean Farrell for criminal solicitation would proceed separately. Potential maximum sentence, 20 years. He turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, the contents of your communications may be subject to further review by the state's attorney. I'd advise you to consult your counsel." Margaret didn't move. She sat perfectly still, staring at the table, as if the world had gone on without her and she was just now noticing. I stood up, walked past her, didn't look down. "You've won," she said to my back. Quiet, stripped. "Happy now?" I stopped. Didn't turn around. This was never about winning. I kept walking. Outside the courthouse, the September sun was almost offensive in its brightness. The world hadn't stopped. Traffic hummed. A man across the street was eating a hot dog. A reporter from the Current approached me on the steps. She was young, late 20s, ponytail, a recorder in her hand. "Ms. Farrell, do you have a comment?" I'd been thinking about this moment since the night I opened Rosemary's letter. Not rehearsing, deciding. What does a person say when the worst of her life becomes public record? She says what matters next. "My grandfather Walter Ashford spent his life building things," I said. "He built houses. He built futures. And even after he was gone, he built mine." The reporter waited. "His home in Glastonbury has been empty for 14 years. I'm turning it into a transitional home for young people aging out of foster care. It's what he wanted." He wrote it down. "What will it be called?" "Ashford Nest." I paused. "Because my grandmother once told me, build your own nest." Behind me, I heard Mrs. Boyd make a sound. A small intake of breath that turned into a sob she caught with her hand. The reporter asked the question I knew was coming. "What about your mother?" "That's a private matter." "Do you forgive her?" 3 seconds of silence. I let them pass. "Forgiveness is a process," I said. "But boundaries are a decision. I've made mine." Grace stood a few feet behind me, arms crossed, smiling the way Grace smiles, more with her jaw than her mouth. She nodded once. Thomas shook my hand on the bottom step. "Your grandfather would be proud." "I know," I said. As the reporter walked away, Mrs. Boyd touched my arm. I want to volunteer at Ashford Nest, she said. Her eyes were red. I owe you 21 years. Then she added quietly, there are 3 other neighbors who saw things back then. We were all too scared of your mother to speak up. She straightened her shoulders. Not anymore. 1 week after the hearing, Margaret requested a meeting. She went through Thomas. I'd blocked her number the day of the trial. I agreed. Public place, neutral ground, a coffee shop on Main Street in Glastonbury called Bean and Spoke. Grace came along and sat one table over, pretending to read a magazine she was holding upside down. Margaret arrived without makeup. No cross necklace, no costume. She looked like a woman who'd been awake for a week, which she probably had. She'd aged 10 years in 7 days. She sat across from me and folded her hands. I'm sorry, she said. For which part? She blinked. For all of it. That's not specific enough for me to accept. Margaret started to cry. Quietly this time. No audience, no performance. I watched her face and tried to tell the difference between real tears and muscle memory. I couldn't. And for the first time in my life, I realized it didn't matter. I'm not going to press charges against you separately, I said. That's not mercy. It's just not worth my energy. But here's what's going to happen. She looked up. You will not contact me. You will not visit Ashford Nest. You will not speak about me publicly. If you do, Thomas has everything he needs to pursue conspiracy charges. I kept my voice flat, steady, the way you'd read the terms of a lease. This isn't a negotiation. I'm your mother, she said. You were, I said. You chose not to be, and I've accepted that. I stood, placed $8 on the table, my coffee and hers, picked up my jacket. Willow. I walked to the door. I didn't look back. Outside, the October air hit my face like cold water. Grace caught up with me on the sidewalk. You okay? No, I said, but I will be. We walked to the car in silence. Behind us, through the window of Bean and Spoke, Margaret Farrell sat alone at a table for 2, both coffees untouched, staring at nothing. The criminal trial came 3 months later. Dean's attorney advised him to take the plea. The evidence was a mountain, and Victor, the man Dean had hired, was cooperating fully in exchange for a reduced sentence. There was no angle left to play. Dean pleaded guilty to criminal solicitation. The judge sentenced him to 8 years, eligible for parole after 5. Victor received 12. I was in the courtroom when Dean stood for sentencing. He wore a county-issued jumpsuit and the kind of expression I'd seen on men in documentaries. Not remorse, just the slow dawning recognition that their story wasn't going to end the way they planned. Before the bailiff let him out, Dean turned toward me. I thought, for one heartbeat, that he might apologize, that he might say something human. I just needed the money, he said. That was it. Not, I'm sorry I tried to kill you. Not, I was wrong. Just, I needed the money. As if I were an obstacle between him and a bank teller. I said nothing. I sat. I listened to the judge close the record. I walked out into a hallway that smelled like floor wax and old coats. Margaret was not charged. The text message, do what you have to do, just keep me out of it, was damning in plain language but legally ambiguous. Her attorney argued it referred to the trust documents. The state's attorney declined to prosecute. Insufficient evidence for conspiracy. But the court of public opinion had already ruled. Margaret's church group quietly removed her from the volunteer roster. Neighbors stopped returning her calls. The Glastonbury she'd curated for 2 decades, the one where she was the devoted mother and I was the troubled runaway, collapsed like a theater set after the lights come up. She sold the house on Sunset Terrace within a month and moved to a small apartment in Clearwater, Florida. Alone. Rachel Dunn's final report answered one last question. Amber Jennings wasn't Dean's girlfriend of 2 years. They'd met on a dating app 3 months before the trip. Rachel traced Amber's phone records. She'd texted Dean a photo of my passport and my flight itinerary the first night at the resort. That's how Dean knew my room number. That's how Victor would have found me. Amber was never charged. She simply ceased to exist in the story. a supporting actress who left when the production shut down. 6 months after the trial, the house on Hubbard Street was reborn. It took a crew of 14 volunteers, a contractor who gave us a discount after reading the Current article, and more coats of paint than I can count. We replaced the porch boards. We fixed the leaky kitchen faucet Grandpa had been getting around to for a decade. We sanded the hardwood floors and patched the drywall and hung new curtains in every room. I kept Grandpa's desk in the living room. On it, I placed the framed photograph of Rosemary and me, the oak box with his diaries inside, and a fresh mug of black coffee every morning, even though no one drank from it. Mrs. Boyd ran the daily operations. 4 other neighbors joined the volunteer board. People who'd spent 20 years believing Margaret's version of events, and now showed up with casseroles, cleaning supplies, and the quiet guilt of having looked the other way. Grace signed on as the health advisor. She drove down from Boston every other weekend and reorganized the medicine cabinet 3 times. My company, Hearthline, partnered as the tech arm, connecting each resident with a vetted mentor through our matching platform. We opened with 3 teenagers. The ceremony was small. No press. No ribbon cutting. Just me, standing in the living room where my grandfather used to read the paper, telling 3 young people the only thing I knew to be true. This house belongs to a man who believed in second chances. He gave me one. Now it's yours. A girl named Lily, 16, close-cropped hair, arms crossed tight against her chest like she was holding herself together, raised her hand. "Did your family throw you out too?" "Yes," I said. "And you turned out okay?" I thought about it. Not for drama, because I wanted to give her an honest answer. "I turned out honest," I said. "That's better than okay." Lily uncrossed her arms. Just slightly, but I noticed. It happened on a Sunday. I was cleaning out the last of Grandpa's closet, the shelf behind the oak box, where old shoe boxes and tax folders had been stacked since the Clinton administration. At the bottom of the pile, I found a manila envelope, thick, heavy, sealed with clear packing tape and labeled in Grandpa's handwriting, "For Willow, when she's ready." Inside, 17 documents. Each one a petition for legal guardianship of a minor child, me, filed with the Connecticut Superior Court. The first was dated June 2003, 7 months after I arrived at his door. The last was from 2012, 2 years before he died. 17 petitions, 17 denials. Every single one had been contested by Margaret. Her objections were consistent. Walter Ashford is elderly. Walter Ashford is in declining health. Walter Ashford cannot provide a stable home environment. The same lies, copy-pasted year after year, stamped and filed by a woman who hadn't set foot in her father's house since she threw her daughter out of her own. I sat on the closet floor with the petitions fanned out around me like a collapsed deck of cards. 17 times he'd walked into a courtroom for me. 17 times my mother slammed the door. And he never told me. Not once. Thomas confirmed it that evening by phone. He didn't want you carrying that weight while you were building your life. He said, and these were his words, "Let her think she's free. She'll fight harder." But there was one more thing. Clipped to the 9th petition, the one from 2005, was a supporting affidavit signed by someone I hadn't thought about in over 20 years. My father, Robert Farrell, the man who left when I was 4 and never looked back. He had signed a document supporting Grandpa Walter's custody bid. 1 page, 1 signature, then silence again. No follow-up, no phone call, no contact. I don't know what it means. I haven't decided if it changes anything. But for the first time since I was a little girl, I thought about my father as something other than absence. I found a letter beneath the petitions, the last one Grandpa ever wrote to me, undated, unsigned, as if he'd started it, put down the pen, and never picked it up again. I failed you 17 times in court, but I will not fail you in my final act. Everything I have is yours. Use it to build what I couldn't, a home no one can take from you. I pressed the letter against my chest, closed my eyes, and let myself cry for the last time in this story. 3 months after Ashford Nest opened, Mrs. Boyd called me on a Wednesday afternoon. Your mother is outside, she said. She's just standing on the sidewalk, across the street, looking at the house. I walked out the front door. Margaret was on the opposite curb, wearing a beige coat and flat shoes. No makeup, no cross. She looked like a woman returning to a place that had moved on without her, which is exactly what she was. She saw me and didn't wave, just stood there, like she was waiting for permission to exist. He gave it to you, she said. The whole house. He gave it to the children who need it. I grew up in that house, and I was thrown out of yours. I stayed on my side of the street. She stayed on hers. We both have memories. The difference is what we do with them. Wind pushed a crumple of dry leaves between us. Somewhere inside, I could hear Lily helping a new resident find the bathroom. Can I come in? Margaret said. Just once. I stood still for 5 seconds. I thought about the rain, the garbage bag, the phone call. Keep her. I don't want her. The 17 petitions, the text to Dean. I thought about all the rooms in my life that Margaret had either locked me out of or tried to break into. No, I said. This is their safe space, not yours. She nodded. Not dramatically, not with tears. Just a small, tired movement of her head, the kind you make when the doctor gives you the result you already expected. She turned and walked down Hubbard Street. Slowly, hands in her pockets. She didn't look back. I watched until she turned the corner and disappeared. Lily appeared behind me in the doorway. Who was that? I looked at the empty sidewalk where my mother had been. Someone who lost something she can't get back. I stepped inside and closed the door. 1 year later, and the house on Hubbard Street is never quiet. There's always someone microwaving leftovers at odd hours, someone playing music too loud in the upstairs bedroom, someone sitting at the kitchen table with a textbook open and a look on their face that says I might actually pull this off. It's not tidy. It's not cinematic. It's the kind of beautiful that comes with scuff marks on the baseboards and a chore wheel that nobody follows perfectly. 14 teens have passed through Ashford Nest. 6 have moved into their own apartments. 2 are in community college. 1 got a full scholarship to Central Connecticut State. The others are still here, still figuring it out, still learning that a safe place doesn't mean a perfect place. Hearthline crossed 3,000 mentor matches last quarter. I split my time between San Francisco and Glastonbury. 2 coasts, 2 lives, 1 purpose. I started therapy in the spring. I know, the woman who built a $47 million company from a dorm room couldn't figure out she needed a therapist. But I'd spent 20 years treating resilience like a replacement for healing. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Tran who drinks herbal tea and never lets me deflect, helped me understand that surviving isn't the same as being okay. Being strong doesn't mean being unbroken, she said during our 3rd session. It means healing out loud. I'm working on that. Grace visits Glastonbury every other weekend now. We cook in Grandpa's kitchen using Rosemary's recipes, her pot roast, her cornbread, her peach cobbler that never turns out right but tastes like home anyway. I hung a new photo on the refrigerator. Not Margaret, not Dean. It's me, Grace, Mrs. Boyd, Thomas, Lily, and the Ashford Nest kids, crowded together on the front porch, everyone mid-laugh. It's the kind of family photo nobody planned. It's my favorite thing I own. Thomas called on a Tuesday. I have something for you. Can you come by the office? He'd never asked me to come in person before. Everything since the trial had been phone calls and e-signatures. So I drove to his office in downtown Hartford. A 2nd-floor walk-up above a sandwich shop, which felt exactly right for a man who'd spent 30 years keeping his promises without needing a corner office to do it. He was standing by the window when I walked in. On his desk, a single envelope, cream-colored. No wax seal this time. Just my name in Grandpa's handwriting, slightly more unsteady than the last letter I'd read. Your grandfather left one final letter, Thomas said. He gave strict instructions. Deliver it exactly 1 year after the will was confirmed in court. He paused. Today is that day. I sat down. I opened it. Dear little bird, if Thomas gave you this letter, it means you survived. I knew you would. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to see it. I'm sorry I couldn't fight louder. But I hope you know. Every day you lived on your own, you proved that love isn't about blood. It's about choice. You chose to keep going. You chose to be kind when the world gave you every reason not to be. You chose to build instead of burn. I'm leaving you everything not because you need it, but because you'll use it right. Don't be angry at your mother forever. She's carrying a weight I couldn't lift for her. But don't let her carry it into your house either. Build your nest. Fill it with people who choose you back. I chose you. Every single day. Grandpa Walter. I folded the letter along its creases, placed it in my jacket pocket against my chest. Thank you, I said, for everything. Thomas took off his glasses, cleaned them with his tie, cleared his throat. It was the honor of my career, Willow. We shook hands. I held on a beat longer than usual. He let me. I walked down the stairs, past the sandwich shop, into the afternoon light, carrying a letter from a man who'd chosen me every single day, even the days I didn't know I needed choosing. That evening, Ashford Nest. Dinner was spaghetti. Overcooked, underseasoned, made by a 17-year-old named Marcus who swore he followed the recipe. Nobody complained. 2 kids argued about basketball. Lily stole garlic bread off someone's plate. Mrs. Boyd told everyone to use napkins. After cleanup, Lily found me in the hallway with her laptop. Can you help me with my college essay? What's your topic? She shrugged, looked at the floor, then at me. The people who saved me. I sat on the bench beside her. Write about the person who saved yourself. That's a better essay. She didn't say anything for a second. Then she opened the laptop and started typing. Later, I sat on the front porch. Grandpa's porch. The same spot where he used to drink black coffee from his world's okayest grandpa mug and wave at Mrs. Boyd across the street. I looked down Hubbard Street, the same road I'd walked in the rain 21 years ago, trash bag over my shoulder, sneakers full of water. The same road Margaret had walked down 3 months ago, hands in her pockets, not looking back. The same road Grandpa had carried me in from the night I arrived at his door. The road hadn't changed, but I had. I pulled out my phone, the photo of Rosemary and me, 5 years old, laughing, always laughing. On the back, in pencil, you were always enough. I put the phone away, leaned back, breathed in the cold Glastonbury air. Above me, the stars did what they always do, showed up without being asked. That's my story. It's not pretty. It's not tied with a ribbon. My brother is in prison. My mother lives alone in Florida. I don't hate either of them, but I don't open my door for them either. Here's what I learned, and I'm not saying this as advice. I'm saying it as someone who walked 3 miles in the rain at 11 years old and spent the next 2 decades trying to understand why. You don't owe loyalty to people who confuse control with love. You don't owe forgiveness on someone else's timeline. And you absolutely don't owe your silence to protect people who wouldn't protect you. If you're in a family that makes you feel small, that makes you question whether you're worth the trouble of keeping. Let me say this as clearly as I can. Leaving is not betrayal. Boundaries are not cruelty. And building a life they didn't plan for you is not revenge. It's survival. My grandfather knocked on the same door 17 times for me. 17 petitions, 17 refusals. He never stopped. If no one has knocked on yours yet, consider this my knock. Build your nest. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story touched something real in you, hit the like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. If you have your own story about setting boundaries with family, about walking away and finding out it was actually walking toward something, the comments are yours. I read every single one. And if you want another story about someone who refused to stay small, check the link in the description. I think you'll see yourself in it. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.